Welcome to Leading from Being with hosts Marti Spiegelman and Todd Hoskins. Together they weave original human wisdom, play with language, and explore leadership and consciousness to help you create more thriving people, teams, organizations, and communities. Today they begin a new series on landscapes, examining how the external territories we inhabit and the internal landscapes of being exist in constant fluid exchange, shaping who we become and how we create thriving in our world. Stick around for takeaways and an essay on potentialities from Todd entitled Integration Happens. Get show notes and much more at leadingfrombeing.com.
Hello and welcome to Leading from Being. My name is Marti Spiegelman and I'm here with my friend and colleague Todd Hoskins. Hey Todd.
Hello, Marty. Great to be with you. And hello to all of our listeners. We are starting something new today, the first episode in our series on landscapes. Marty, why don't you lead the way?
Thank you, Todd. So, even if we think we know what a word means, a word like landscapes, it's always fun to consult what I call the goddess Google to see what we find, especially when we're introducing a new topic here on Leading from Being. So when I went off to search the word landscape, I found a small mountain of information. I found out that a landscape is a painting, and I found out that it's a geographical area. I found out there are 4 kinds of landscapes, or 20 kinds of landscapes, depending on the source you consult. And I also found out there are 5 principles of landscapes, or 7, again, depending on who you're consulting. And of course, there's landscaping. And according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the word landscape comes from the Middle Dutch. The root words are land for land and skap for ship. Now, that's a very interesting beginning for a land-based word. And looking at the variety of definitions I eventually found for landscape, it seemed to me that our ideas about landscape started with land and sea in conversation and continued through the centuries to be quite fluid, like a great shoreline littered with meanings and viewpoints. And all this was very intriguing to me, so I went deeper. And what flowed into my search then were other words related to landscape, words that have to do with land and travel and great crossings and culture. For example, the word pilgrim comes from the Latin word peregrinus, per, P-E-R, meaning through, and ager, meaning field, country, or land. And the term pilgrim eventually came to mean a stranger, someone on a journey, someone crossing unknown lands or perhaps unknown seas. And then I imagined humankind on its great migration all over the world, establishing its cultures, tilling the soils, and creating a new balance of the wild and the domesticated. And I mentioned culture a minute ago. The word culture comes from the Latin root cultus, meaning to till the soil. So here, this word landscape was taking me on a great pilgrimage to a primordial principle of consciousness, the principle of complementarities, the solid shore, the fluid sea, the wild lands, the cultivated fields. And I was beginning to experience landscape. I realized that landscape itself is a principle of consciousness, one that has deep roots in the human journey as we traveled across great expanses to populate the planet and develop a cornucopia of human creative expression. Now, we usually think of physical landscapes when we hear that word, especially our external environments, the shape of the land we're standing on or living in. And our physical landscapes, of course, are comprised of mountains and valleys, rivers and lakes, prairies and buttes, deserts and forests. Each feature a unique living system in itself, yet inextricably connected to and dependent on all other landscapes. And we know there are processes and forces of life that weave the tapestry of each landscape. And there are even larger forces that reshape each landscape, driving great transitions in form and habitation and climate through the ages. And the forces of change in a physical landscape turn out to be based in fluidity. The forces of wind and water and flowing lava, the forces of glaciers and tectonic plates on the move. All of these shape the physical landscape, and this reshaping affects all the related landscapes as well as the pilgrims journeying across them. So there I am pondering my collection of definitions, and I returned once again to my sense of landscape as a principle of consciousness. It became clear that landscapes are not just external physical geographies, they can also be internal. They can be what the San Pedro shamans of northern Peru call landscapes of the heart. And these skillful shamans restore individual and collective health by visioning into experiences and relationships that exist in the context of our primary connections in life. And depending on what they find in that visioning work, they deliver healing energies and wisdom to the individual or the collective in order to restore a right relationship and renew the power of unconditional love. This indigenous understanding is that we are inextricably connected to our landscapes, external and internal, and the degree of awareness that we bring to our participation in those landscapes is what creates meaning, value, and the momentum to make life-positive choices and take action that produces collective thriving. The degree of awareness we bring to our participation, that's vital. But in the Western world, of course, we're not very skillful with awareness. Whether internal or external, sometimes we're aware of the landscape we're in and sometimes not. Sometimes we love the landscape we're in, and other times we're fighting it tooth and nail. Sometimes we just take from our landscapes and don't give back. And then we destroy the delicate balances and interactions that keep the whole system healthy and growing, whether it's an external or an internal landscape. This is true. And no matter how we're responding to our landscape, whether we're aware of our coordinates or not, the truth is we're always in a landscape of some kind. We're always in a context that is larger, if only by a bit, than ourselves. Even if we're ego-bound, feeling trapped in ourselves, consider that the landscape we're bound to is our own personal history and our ego's emotional patterning. So there's a lot to learn from our landscapes. And the more courageous we are in allowing ourselves to really see where we are, the more effectively and creatively we can grow, create abundance, and evolve into states of thriving. So after all this research, I ended up with this feeling, this sense that we are the wayfinders of our times. And a skillful wayfinder does not fight the landscape he's crossing. He gets to know it. He works with it. He finds out how it grows and especially how it changes. He moves with the larger forces of change, making relationship with them, learning from them, because he knows those larger fluid forces are in the process of shaping a new territory where thriving can begin anew. And my sense is that exploring the landscapes of our lives and our world can set us free. So let's explore together, Todd. Shall we do that? What are your thoughts at this point?
Yes, so many. Where are we? Or where am I? I love the possibility of exploring the external with the internal, of enlarging this whole idea of landscape. One thing that came to mind was, where do I feel at home? Or I'm going to borrow from Bio Okomolafe in encouraging us to think of homing, of movement towards home rather than home being a static place. And so where am I moving what landscape am I moving within or moving to that I feel most comfortable? And there's the sense I was born in a glaciated prairie that had become industrialized, but there's something about the soft rolling hills, the flatness, when there's wildness, the tall grass, the butterflies, all the flying insects, that feels like home. And now I live in the jungle, which is the type of forest. And anytime I'm in a forest, something in me comes alive. And I could think about the different landscapes that I move between, and I have different feeling or a different sense when I'm in them. With the internal, I feel like I am homing when there's a lightness to my being, when there's an agility, when there is a capacity to go deep into conversation, into feeling, but also to come to the surface with lightness and humor and responsiveness and play. And I feel like I am not homing when I'm very serious and morose, but some people are actually very serious, and perhaps that is homing for them to own that seriousness and not try to be homing towards the comedian or the attractive person on Instagram or the landscape of seriousness. I think I have deep respect for, and I feel that there's all these landscapes that we judge. What are the landscapes that culturally have value and the landscapes that are overlooked or seen as unimportant? So that's the first round of responses that come up.
Wow, I love it. Homing is beautiful. You know, it reminded me that when people come to work with me in my big program, one of the first things everyone says is, I feel like I just came home to myself. And what leads them to that experience is the first little bit of work is putting our awareness and our sensing capacity into the landscape around us. And I always think of that, the way Angela Zarian used to say it, is that nature always reflects to us our true nature. This is one of the reasons I got so excited when you suggested landscape as our next topic, because this really is our coming alive in the world that we have and our coming alive as ourselves. And to do that, you have to be comfortable with yourself. You have to come home to yourself and find a way to be at home wherever you are. And it also reminds me of some of the elders I've spoken with. They say that when you get to a certain degree of consciousness, full consciousness, if you understand a little bit about the energy body, no matter where you go on the belly of the earth, in full consciousness, you have a capacity to make energetic connections literally into the land where you are, where you're visiting. And the land speaks to you and tells you about itself. And so if any of our listeners are comfortable travelers, you know that feeling when you get to someplace and you feel at home, even though you've just arrived there. That's your consciousness at work in conversation with the external landscape, informing your internal landscape, being received by an external landscape and lighting up the internal landscape that is you. And this is just one of the more magical things about human consciousness. And it seems like landscape actually is a principle of consciousness. But we look at, I really caught my attention when you said there are landscapes that we judge. We're using our consciousness, our awareness, our discernment in modern culture to chop things up apart. And we're using it to refuse landscapes. And I think we end up refusing the whole landscape of life. You know? And that's really tough because we're in a time on the planet when, I mean, I've been hearing this, we've all been hearing this for at least a decade, that things are falling apart and there's big change on the move. Oh, it's been happening for quite a while. And we're in a new wild place. And if ever we needed the principle of landscape to come alive in us. And if ever we needed to remember our capacity to find our way, like the great Polynesian navigators or the explorers who discovered all the features of North America, we need it now because we're in a new wilderness. And so, it also makes me wonder, is there a new way to talk about the experience of exploring a landscape that would light people up? If I talk about it in terms of consciousness, everybody kind of inches toward the door. Like, I don't know, I don't want to do that. I'm comfortable inside. But we should explore what would actually ignite people.
Yes. I would love to explore that blurred line between internal and external, the brackish waters. One of the things that came up when you were talking about the connection to the land is the assumption that no matter what landscape, external landscape I am in, that I am separate from that landscape. It is Todd in the jungle. And Todd is separate from the jungle. And Todd does not become the jungle. Todd does not merge with the jungle. It's not Todd and the jungle become one. But Todd, the relationship between me and now having lived in the jungle for nearly 3 years is that I am not just a traveler or an outsider who is spending time physically in the jungle. There's a relationship there that is, I am a part of the jungle. I am participating with the jungle. I am absorbing the rhythms of the jungle and listening and responding in the ways of the jungle. And we talked about judgments here. We're going to think about Tarzan or other symbols of, like, Todd is beating drums, Todd is ripping off his shirt and screaming. And that's not how this jungle, this tropical dry forest jungle is. At some points, it's very windy during the dry season and the howling winds. And at some points, it's torrential rain. And at some points, the insects are so loud and the howling monkeys are so loud. And there's a lot of undulation between sounds and physical feelings, not as much between temperatures. The temperatures are pretty much within a 15-degree range any time of the year. But there's diversity here. And people ask me, like, what has changed within you living these years in Costa Rica? And what they're asking in that question is, what is living in a different country or different culture? What is different about that? And what is different about the landscape that you are in? Nobody's ever asked me, how has living in the jungle shifted anything in you?
Oh my goodness, really? Well, if we needed any evidence that we've become too self-referential, we have it. Yeah, I was just thinking about just listening to you and listening to you describing what it is to, we say in the traditions, to be informed by a landscape and to become part of a landscape. It speaks to us. We have a different experience when we're in the winds of the jungles and the howler monkeys, and it's a different experience, and it should change us. It should put something new into the inner landscape of us. It should spark an idea. It should spark a new feeling of belonging. It should spark some excitement to participate in a landscape. And I think that in Western culture, we have done such a poor job of receiving people into life and giving our children a sense of belonging to a larger tribe and helping them understand who they are and why they're valued in the larger collective. I think we've done such a poor job of that for Westernized individuals, it's hard to conceive of belonging to anything else because we're still trying to find ourselves. And we've completely lost the sense that the way we find ourselves is to connect to something bigger.
Yes. Let's talk about meditation.
Oh.
That popped up on the the internal, external landscapes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you and I have actually talked about this before, but before I met Marty, sometime around 15 years ago, I had started meditating in the late 90s, disciplined, sitting on a cushion, trying multiple times a day, trying long sessions, trying short sessions. Everyone told me that I would benefit greatly if I started meditating. So I made it a practice. I adopted it. Did I feel any shifts over time? Maybe. I'm not quite sure. I definitely developed a greater awareness of how often thoughts run through my head and how noisy my internal landscape can be. But something really shifted when somebody suggested, and this is right before I met you, somebody suggested, why don't you do a walking eyes open meditation? I was like, well, that sounds like more my type of thing because I love to hike. I love to be outdoors. And I was like, I'm going to give that a trial run. And so I would go on walks and try to translate the meditative practices of sitting into hiking through nature, whether it was on the beach along the shores of Lake Michigan or in the dunes or in the woods. I was trying to meditate with my eyes open. In other words, I was trying to silence my thoughts while I was walking. And then I met Marty, and we did some conversation that eventually led to some talk about practices, and we made some suggestions. And she said, what if you just turned off the lens of meditation altogether and tried doing that walk in nature and just be open and attuned to the environment you're in? And I can remember saying to you, Marty, I was like, well, Marty, that's not meditation. And I think you said, no, it's not, but it'll benefit you in the same way, if not more. And that's now close to 15 years ago.
Wow.
And there's a huge difference. And I don't want to attribute cause and effect to how you meditate or if you meditate makes the difference in the outcomes of your life. But that practice of putting my awareness out into the world, feeling a part of the experience of walking through nature, not trying to separate myself or quiet my thoughts, I found that if my awareness is out into the world, if I am in that state, I am actually thinking less without trying to think less. The noise level, the internal landscape noise, is less because I am connected to my environment. Now, I know you have a lot of things to say about meditation, but I will pause there and let you weigh in.
Yeah, and I try not to be offensive. It's like, I was giving a talk a week or so ago, and somebody asked me about Buddhism, and I said, oh, dear God, somebody asked me the Buddhist question. So I really try not to be offensive, but I'm going to talk technically here. Todd, what you're describing is stepping into full connection with the world around you, which automatically shuts off what we call that inner dialogue, where we're just talking to ourselves. And that inner dialogue usually happens at the ego level of consciousness. So the voice we hear inside us is the inner critic. And it's all limbic reactivity, and it's not very helpful. And so doing the walking meditation, wide awake, experiencing the whole world around you, it fills you with energy. It ramps up your bioenergetic force. It feeds you heart and soul. It feeds your physical body, your energy body. It's like a plant finally getting a good root system and reaching towards some beautiful sunlight. Yeah. And what's happened in the contemplative traditions, and to our listeners, I'm speaking very broadly. So again, I don't mean to offend anybody, But what can happen with Western people taking up the contemplative traditions of meditation is that when all that wisdom got translated into the West, about half the equation was left behind. And so meditation can turn into someone sitting alone trying to empty themselves out. And the other half of the equation isn't there. If your heart's beating, you are receiving information from the world 24/7. That's a neurological fact. You can't stop it. Even if your heart stops and you're in the ER, you're still collecting data from the world around you. There's all kinds of research proving that. So to have an idea that meditation is to sit quietly and be empty, it's like taking a breath in and never breathing out again. What I'm saying is we have to be cautious with the contemplative traditions. They help many, many people. And there are many beautiful masters of those traditions, but you want to be careful that you're getting the whole picture. Yeah. If we look into what are historically older traditions than the Buddhist traditions, the older traditions, like the Yaquis in central Mexico, is very ancient lineage. And they talk about shutting off the inner dialogue. And they say that you have to shut the inner dialogue off. If you can manage that, everything is possible. But they don't say that you do it by standing still. Consciousness is on the move all the time. Consciousness is flowing information through you. The universe is flowing energy and information through us so we can create and come into fulfillment and blossom over and over and over again. And you got to be on the move for that. You know, we all know if we sit at our computer desks too long, everything starts to come to a grinding halt in our bodies, right? We have to get up and move. And so I had this delightful conversation with a fellow who was visiting the US, and he was becoming a Sufi master. And for some reason, he wanted to come to the States to see how Western people studied his tradition. And I blurted out, why? He didn't really have a good answer, and we just kept talking about our traditions. He did say that he was finding what I had observed, that Western people had only half the picture. We were just sharing what our elders had taught us. And he said, well, you know, my elders taught me that if you go deep enough into yourself, you find the universe. See, there's the other half of the equation. You go find yourself and you find yourself in the universe. And I said to him, well, my elders taught me if you go deep enough into the universe, you find yourself. And so all of the traditions, if we go back to the original wisdom, that Western dialogue is us talking to ourselves and not connected into the world. So the way to stop that inner dialogue is to not stop being aware. It's not to only be aware of the dialogue. The way to stop the dialogue is to get your awareness off it and out into the world, into something that is alive and on the move and growing and teaching you and showing you how to be in your brilliant fullness.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I want to go back to the word that you used in the introduction, shaping and reshaping.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this fits with our relationship with landscapes, the landscapes that we are in, we are a part of. We are part of the shaping of that landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the default is to turn to the obvious and the visible. So yeah. I am shaping the jungle landscape. Todd, are you getting out a bulldozer? Do you have a machete? Are you cutting things down? Are you making new water flows, streams? Like, how are you shaping the landscape? What physical work is creating manifestations that shift the landscape? And there's something here between the relationship between the invisible and the visible that I think is hard for many people to believe, that my presence has an impact on more than just the people and the pets around me, but that I am influencing and influenced by the landscape. And this is not an ego-based thing that come see Todd shape the landscape of the jungle. We're all doing it, whether we're aware of it or not.
Yeah.
And this is part of the issue with humans separating themselves from nature, is that wherever we are, we're not just destroying, we're also creating. What's visible and talked about on the media is what we're destroying, but we're also creating. Can you say more about that?
I'm thinking of the elders in the Andes who are so close to Pachamama, to the earth. And they are constantly feeding the earth. They give little offerings, sometimes big offerings, but on a daily basis, little offerings, a little flower with prayers in it, a little bit of your dinner before you eat your dinner, the first drop of your cerveza before you have a drink at the end of the day. They're constantly in exchange with that land. And the feeding of the land results in the land being more fertile and the crops being healthier and the herds being more numerous. It's not just that we are shaping the land, we are entering into a fluid exchange. Think about life. Life goes through cycles of growth, flowing through cycles of growth over and over again. We need water to be alive. You know, the cycles of life flow one to the next. In shaping the land, we're shaping the fertility of the land. We're shaping the capacity of the land to be more abundant so we can be well fed, so we can be more creative. And so each system, each species ultimately is supporting the other. And, you know, you've hit on something really deep, which is the incredibly deep imprinting in modern humans that we are separate. In my mentoring groups, we study this a lot. And I have people who've been with me for a decade, and we're still finding imprinted patterns of Western separatism. The human is separate from everything else. It's so deep. And you talk about that invisible. That's one of the invisible things that drives us away from the bountiful life that we're seeking. When we're in a landscape, the landscape knows us. And if we allow ourselves to know that landscape, we benefit energetically, spiritually, emotionally, and the landscape also benefits. So our presence actually matters. I don't know if any of you have ever even, I think about a house plant. If you've got a house plant, do you talk to your plant? Try it. The plant will be healthier. The plant responds. And the plant gains power and life force because we're in conversation with it, and we gain something from it. So this being in conversation, there are visible results of the invisible exchange of our energies. And we do shape the landscape, and it does shape us in turn.
That is beautiful. So I'm curious, Marti, you have a relationship with the far north, the Arctic, which is not one landscape. There's a collection of them up there. You make frequent trips. Can you talk about what it is that attracts you, and what is the relationship to Arctic landscapes? And then I would love to do a little jam on perhaps one landscape that had meaning for me.
People ask me that question all the time. And they also ask me when I go on my Arctic trips, aren't you going to be cold? And I was recently in northwestern Canada. It was in the 80s and 90s every day with beautiful sun. We were on a gorgeous river for 2 weeks and 24-hour daylight. I think one of the things really ultimately that when I get to the Arctic really just grabs me is you can feel the electromagnetic field of the planet coming toward the pole and turning back into the planet itself. And you can feel that happening in your own energy body. So you're fed these extraordinary energies. And depending on where you are in the Arctic, usually I'm taking a river north if I'm in North America. And so you go through different landscapes. And the river I was on, as an example, We started near the headwaters and we went through a little mountain region, and then we're in a canyon region, and then you come out onto the Arctic plains. And by the time you hit the Arctic plains, there are no more trees, there's no more hills. All you see is that extraordinary horizon, and you can start to feel the curve of the earth, and you can see forever. But that magnetic field is pouring into you. It's getting closer and closer. So you're completely free. There's no limit, and you're being fed to the hilt with extraordinary energy. And all the wild animals around you they're doing their thing. In June, the caribou are up there having their calves, and all the flowers are blooming if you hit the right 2 weeks, which we did. It's just full of life at all scales. And all those animals are up there in their cycles of life. We're being fed. And can you feel this? It shapes you. It's extraordinary what it does for you. Yeah. And we try to move through those landscapes without shaping them. We're very, very careful to take out everything that we take in. And we have very good practices there. But you can't help but be magnetized into that landscape. You can't help but feel the earth and feel the power of life going through its cycles. And then, of course, for me, I always love to imagine my scale relative to the scale of the actual planet, relative to the scale of the actual universe, toward the top of the planet, that desire to experience all these radically different scales at once, to place myself in the universe, the landscape of the universe. Like we were talking about at the beginning of our session today, it brings you home to yourself in the most remarkable way that you can't really find in the city.
Wow, that just made me want to visit the Arctic. So I love going to the desert. I love going to the mountains. I feel at home in the prairie. But I lived in big cities for 20 years in Chicago and Seattle. And as humans are a part of nature, I do love humans. I don't want to be anti-human in this whole, but the Upper Peninsula of Michigan has a very low human density population. So it's the size of Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island combined, but with only 500,000 people across that entire expanse. Huron, Lake Michigan, and the glorious Lake Superior on three sides. So much fresh water. But I do wonder if part of the reason that I feel so at home there, not just because of the population density, is because it was an area of intense extraction. So the economy up in the Upper Peninsula did have a boom. It was all about logging and mining, iron mining, copper mining, and timber. And that exists on a very, very limited scale now. And so that is a land that has had to heal itself, to be in the process of healing, to come back to a new state, a different state, a post-extraction state. And there are still wounds from that human activity that you can feel when you're up there. What draws me is the vibrant life, the density of the woods, the deciduous and evergreen mixes, the Huron Mountains, which are very old and they only go up to 1,800, 2,000 feet, but you can feel the age of them. And to be in that place where to have large bodies of water on three sides means you have very unpredictable weather. The weather shifts quickly. You can get lots of snow in many areas, lots of rain, but what's felt most often is how quickly the temperature, the winds, the sun, the clouds, all of that can change very quickly. So there's a vibrancy to the patterns. There's a vibrancy of what can happen in healing lands. The wildlife, I think I've probably said on this podcast before, many, many deer encounters, hundreds of deer, but moose and bear and larger creatures that live in and call those woods home, that the humans there have a relationship with deep respect, that they are seen as sacred. And we're talking about immigrants, because this is mining and logging and all the labor that's been brought in since the 19th century. There's people from all over the world who settled in the Upper Peninsula, but they attached this orientation towards this land and being in it. It actually reminds me of Costa Rica in many ways. People are shocked when I say that, but when I'm in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, when I'm in Costa Rica, there's a lot of similarities. The temperature will be different, but the feel is often the same. The creatures that I see are different. A lot less color. You see here in the tropics where the flowers tend to be very extravagant. The thimbleberries, which are grow in the wild, and the last time that we were hiking up there, we just saw acres and acres of wild thimbleberries, which are too soft to commercialize.
So
and they're bright red, and you pick them off and they immediately kind of fall apart in your hand, but you put it up to your mouth and they're a little bit sour and sweet, and it is abundance for the creatures up there, that how many of them live off the thimbleberries during the harvest season. It's fun to be able to talk about these relationships.
Yeah. You know what I'm hearing in what you're sharing is that if humans would only really fall into a landscape and let themselves be taught and received and respond to that landscape, we're actually wonderful as long as we are connected to the landscapes of our lives. And the external landscapes, when we get to know those landscapes like you and I are talking about, Todd, that shapes the internal landscape.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you don't have the connection outwardly, then your internal landscape really suffers. I think one of the things we've talked about this, I mention this to people often, we have a big challenge in the world today. And this is one of the reasons I think we started talking about landscapes at all. There are so many humans. There's never been this many humans. And so many of those humans do not have access to wilderness, to nature, to a park, and they won't in their lifetimes. And our challenge is to find a way to help people connect with a landscape around them and inform the inner landscapes. This is how all human cultures have taught their children and grown into successful, long-lived cultures, by making relationship with their landscape and being shaped by it and shaping themselves to it. So everyone and everything is working in union toward the evolution, the bounty that is required. And so I think this is maybe one of the most important series that we've done on leading from being. And I want to thank you for the topic.
Oh, yes. We don't know how many episodes we're doing on this, but I am so glad we got this started. And it feels like it is time to shift to our special segment, potentialities.
Yeah. So Todd, what potentiality are you going to share with us today?
Potentialities. Potentialities.
I would like to spend some time today exploring integration. There's great potentiality here, but we're going to need to put our sorting hats on and take a look at the worldviews that are embedded in this word. As mental health seems to be a topic that surfaces frequently, we hear voices calling for self-care, therapy, nutrition, spiritual practices, political revolution, friendships, digital detoxification. I think you understand. I could keep going. And in many circles, from the workplace to the meditation room, people are encouraging others to engage in integration. Over the last 15 years, YouTube video searches, including the word integration, have increased by over 600%. Years ago, I was a part of a corporate business unit that decided to rename itself Integrated Business Solutions. Why? That sounded sophisticated. It sounded like what the world needed. But with the acronym IBS, you know how much corporations love acronyms, it eventually became a joke when irritable bowel syndrome entered the public lexicon. I've been on retreats where integration time was about journaling at the end about our experience. I've heard business leaders talk about integration in relation to flowcharts and roundtable discussions. Most often, when we hear about integration, whether it's in an organizational or personal growth context, the assumption is that there are puzzle pieces lying on the table, and one or more of us need to put the puzzle together. In other words, work. Figure it out. But this is not how integration works in nature. Daniel Siegel, who pioneered interpersonal neurobiology, defines integration as the linkage of differentiated components of a system. And he would say it's at the heart of well-being. In the brain, the visual cortex processes sight, the auditory cortex handles sound, the prefrontal areas manage planning, yet they're continuously communicating through networks of synapses. These synaptic linkages create pathways that allow different parts of the brain to share information while preserving their distinct capabilities. It's a beautiful example of complementarity. Happens everywhere in the human body, parts that are both differentiated and connected, maintaining their uniqueness while participating in the larger whole. Siegel talks about the river of integration flowing between the banks of chaos and rigidity. When we're integrated, we're flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable. When we lose integration, we fall into either chaotic disconnection or rigid over-control. This happens with our psyches, this happens with our physical bodies, and this happens other places. The same pattern appears everywhere in nature. In living systems, healthy function emerges when specialized parts maintain their uniqueness while staying dynamically connected. From quantum fields to ecosystems, integration isn't something we do. It's what happens when systems are functioning well. Our cultural commitment to integrating, our need to figure it out, work it out, iron it out, is not actually how we're designed to flourish. Like many truths of how life works, we've tried to pull apart the inherent wholeness in order to give ourselves more control, or so we think, but it's not working. Think about it this way. You don't make your heart beat by thinking about it. You don't consciously coordinate the trillions of cellular processes that keep you alive. Integration is happening all the time. In our work, we've seen this again and again. When a team stops trying so hard to get aligned and instead creates the conditions for their collective awareness to flow together, when they're present, connected to each other and to what is actually happening, integration happens. The frameworks emerge, the clarity comes, the next steps become obvious. But this requires a fundamental shift from the Western way of using awareness only in the linear aspect. We have to move beyond seeing only outcomes and frameworks, beyond the part of our brain that's not wired to sensory experience. When we step out of direct experience with life and get locked into that tiny compartment that only recognizes structure, we lose our capacity to allow the larger consciousness to flow through us and inform us moment to moment. So the next time someone asks you to integrate, or you hear the inner voice telling you it's integration time, stop. Walk outside. In that moment, don't try to figure out how the forest is working. Feel the forest in its own state of flow. Notice everything is integrated. The soil, the roots, the trees, the air, the light, all differentiated, all linked, all flowing together in a wholeness that requires no effort from you to understand. This can happen on your team, in your family, or in your own life if we stop trying so hard to figure it out and we learn to shift our own state of being with awareness, with presence, in a connected state. Integration isn't a task on your to-do list. It's what's available when you flow into the movement of life itself. There is a time for assembling puzzles, but integration, just like working puzzles, happens when our states of being are attuned, connected to the world, and responsive.
Brilliant. Todd, thank you. You have just given us one of the most beautiful examples of what I'm always saying when I talk about that Western habit of our being in linear awareness focused on an outcome or an endpoint. People confuse the outcome for the source. And you have just given us a brilliant mapping of that problem. Integration
Thank you,
is
Marti.
an outcome. It's an outcome. It's not a source action. That is fabulous. Thank you so much. What a great time with you today, Todd. I think it's time for our takeaways.
Yes, it
Do
is.
you have a takeaway for us?
It's pretty straightforward.
Takeaways.
Be who you are, where you are. And Marti, takeaway?
One of them I think I just shared is what you did so beautifully. Integration is an outcome. It's not something we do. It's what happens when we are fully conscious and collective and all the systems are working properly. I really love that. And my other takeaway is the profound foundation that we laid down today. It was really important what we've done talking about landscapes. It really highlights the requirement that we wake up to how we belong and participate in the landscapes of our lives, externally and internally. Really awesome.
Well, thank you, Marti. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today here at Leading from Being. We love to get messages. You can check us out at leadingfrombeing.com.
Looking forward to it. And until next time, everybody, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Leading from Being. You can learn more at leadingfrombeing.com, including contact information for Marti and Todd. Our theme song is courtesy of Cloud Cult.